In this video, we'll be going over delegation of control in Active Directory for the domains, specifically with organizational units, OUs. It's important to begin to understand what we're trying to accomplish and why. Microsoft provides a very good article which explains all of this. So I'm going to read through a lot of it because it's very important. Keeping in mind that the general thought here is that we want to restrict administrator access to organizational units with limited permissions based on the RBAC, the role-based access control, giving administrators access to what they need to accomplish their daily tasks, but only what they need and where they need it. So at the beginning here, it's very important. Delegation of control means you can assign a range of administrative tasks to different users or groups, and we're going to focus on groups as best practice. You can assign basic administrative tasks, we'll see that, to regular users or groups, and leave domain-wide and forest-wide administration to members of the domain admins and enterprise admin groups. That's very important. The whole idea here is we don't give godlike permissions to every administrator and every level of IT tiers within your organization. By delegating administration, you can allow groups within your organization to take more control of their local resources. And most importantly, you can also help secure your Active Directory environment from accidental or malicious damage by limiting the membership of the administrator groups. So we're really trying to secure Active Directory here from intentional or unintentional security risks. You can delegate administrative control to any level of a domain tree by creating organizational units. So either those OUs already exist or they have to be restructured in a logical manner to make it administratively fit for your roles and a security model that makes sense for your organization and your tiers of administration within a domain, and delegating administrative control for specific organizational units to particular users or groups. And that's important to remember, is that we're going to use the delegation of control wizard per each OU that you want to assign permissions to. So they kind of allude to what I was talking about earlier. To decide what organizational units you want to create and which organizational units should contain accounts or shared resources, consider the structure of your organization. And that's very important. This may require that you review the structure of your OUs and possibly even restructure them and move objects, users, groups, computers, contacts, all that kind of stuff, and restructure it. For instance, if you have a very flat OU structure, it's not going to accommodate delegation of permissions very well, and especially if you have a larger IT department and you have to delegate permissions to, let's say, different departments, and you have very many different admin roles. Like some admin roles might be designed to only reset passwords, and some might be device administrators, and some might be server administrators, and all that kind of stuff. I do have a video that I've created on the 10 biggest mistakes in Active Directory. and how to resolve them. So check out that link. Talks a lot about organizational unit structure and best practice. Okay, moving along here. Active Directory defines specific permissions, and we'll take a look at this. You can get very granular with these permissions and user rights that can be used for delegating or restricting administrative control. Using a combination of organizational units, groups, and permissions, you can define the most appropriate administrative scope for a particular person, which is not best practice. Usually it's groups, which could be an entire domain, all organizational units within a domain, or a single organizational unit. Best practice dictates that we don't do it on the entire domain or all organizational units. You want to do it OU by OU, or at least on the parent OU level. All right, so last little bit of details. Administrative control can be assigned to a user or group using the Delegation of Control Wizard, which we're going to go through. You can use the Delegation of Control Wizard to delegate the following tasks. And we'll see this. These are the main tasks. I mean, there's a lot more granularity than is being shown here. But these are the common tasks. Basically, create, delete, manage, reset passwords, read, modify, join a computer to the domain, manage group policy links, generate result of policy, again, GPO, planning and logging, create, delete, manage, other types of objects, blah, blah, blah. So if you want to get more information, complete details, here's the link up here that Microsoft provides to get some more details and complete information on all of this. The Delegation of Control Wizard is typically performed by a domain admin, unless the Delegation of Wizard is already given you permissions on a specific OU to further delegate in a larger organization. So let's move on to the next section, which we will do an overview on all the tasks that are required to accomplish this. So the first step is to plan your custom roles. And this is not something that we can dictate for you as an organization. This is probably the biggest part of deciding how you're going to delegate permissions in your organization. You have to identify which roles, according to the tiers of administration and the groups that you're going to use to assign those tiers of administration in the organization, and also align those to the organizational units, the OUs, inside of your AD structure, your hierarchy. Again, this may take some redesigning. So, for instance, you might have several departments and several sites, and maybe some administrators will have control over only certain sites or certain departments, and maybe they only have certain permissions over certain sites or certain departments. So you have to consider how that's going to work in your organization, and you have to have an OU structure hierarchy that's going to support delegation of permissions on AD. So you'll need to identify those things. And also you'll need to identify the permissions that each one of these administrative groups is going to have over each one of those objects, and rearrange Active Directory if necessary to move those objects into appropriate OUs so that we can delegate permissions over those OUs for those administrators. And we're always going to want to keep in mind the least permissions model. Only give permissions on the OUs and the objects in those OUs based upon the need to manage those objects with the least amount of permissions necessary, and not to over-delegate permissions. And when identifying those permissions, you're going to want to take a look at basic permissions such as full control, read, write, delete, or custom permissions such as password reset or user administration, those kind of things, or joining computers to domain, depending on your needs for each role and your organization. Once you've identified those custom roles, you really need to list them out. And once you've listed them out, you want to create security groups that match those permissions so that we can use those security groups when we go through the delegation of control wizard on each OU. And we're going to look at parent and nesting groups for permissions when we get into that. And finally, we're going to actually go into Active Directory, and we're going to run the delegation wizard on each organizational unit that you want to delegate control to. And we're going to do one of two things in the delegation wizard. We're going to either choose common tasks, which are very basic and kind of general, or we're going to go into custom tasks based on your organizational needs and each role group that you have defined. And what you define is your needs for permissions in your organization. We can't really go over planning your custom roles because that is highly customizable. Just as a matter of fact, keep in consideration what we've discussed already. We're just going to jump into, as our next step, going through all the steps are through the Delegation of Control Wizard and discussing the options. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. In order to best understand delegation of permissions, we must first review or investigate best practice on the OU organizational unit hierarchy that Microsoft dictates with a tiering model for administrative purposes called Tier 0, Tier 1, and Tier 2. There's a pretty good Microsoft article shown right here, and I want to go over a few things in that really briefly just to help you understand what this tiering model is and why you should follow this tiering model in some fashion in your AD environment with your organizational units, your OUs. The AD administrative tier model prevents escalation of privilege by restricting what administrators can control and where they can log on. In the context of protecting Tier 0, the latter ensures that Tier 0 credentials cannot be exposed to a system belonging to another tier, Tier 1 or Tier 2. So what is Tier 0? Tier 0 includes accounts, admins, service, and computer accounts groups that have direct or indirect administrative control over all AD-related identities and identity management systems. So this is a global level, top level tier OU. For example, domain admins, enterprise admins, schema admins. They're going to be at the top level. There's going to be an OU for tier 1. So a few critical things to consider when you're doing the delegation of permissions. Credentials from a higher privileged tier must not be exposed to lower tier systems. Lower tier credentials can use services provided by higher tiers, but not the other way around. Any system or user account that can manage a higher tier is also a member of that tier. So where do we place which kind of users and groups and objects inside of this model? Taking a look at this diagram, tier 0 is going to have your domain, enterprise admin, schema admins. Some other higher level admins like PKI for the certificate authorities, management of certificate authorities, and Active Directory. Tier 1 is going to have your member servers and your member server administrators, your enterprise application administrators, your cloud service administrators, any kind of server or cloud or application administrators are going to go in tier 1. So tier 1 is business critical data and applications, all those type of resources, whereas tier 0 is any administrators or systems that control the entire global organization enterprise-wide. Tier 2 are any accounts with administrative privileges over only standard user accounts and single user devices. Obviously, it doesn't flow up, but it should flow down when you're doing a delegation of permissions in your model. So these are the help desk support, device support, user support type of groups and users. So what does it look like in my lab environment? Just as a very basic sample example, tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, and underneath each one of those, I'm going to have it broken down just a little bit. Of course, this is going to depend on your organization. So if we take a look at tier 1, I've got all my servers in there. I should have broken them down into the different folders, but I don't think I've done that. Got just a little bit lazy, I guess. Then I've got the groups, which are the administrative groups for the admin roles we're going to use in our Delegation of Control Wizard for those server type admins. And then we're going to have some users in there as well. And then if we go down to tier 2, we're going to have a little bit more granularity. Going to have our domain users, and then we might have OUs for different departments within our organization, and going to have groups, an OU for groups, maybe vendor accounts, workstations, and then typically you might have a technology one at this level for the help desk type of admin roles. So you can see I've got device administrators, password administrators, user administrators, and what we'll call campus technicians. So in our example, we're going to use these groups underneath tier 2 to delegate permissions through the Delegation of Control Wizard to probably the domain users OU inside of tier 2. So you get how that works? These admins are in the same tier of the OUs that you want to delegate them to. All right. So let's jump right into the Delegation Control Wizard. So we should discuss security groups just a little bit and distinguish between security groups that align to a user's work role, their place in the organization as far as their duties as a worker is considered, and security groups that are designed specifically for administrative roles. I want to look at this at the most basic level so it's comprehensible, and we can get into nesting a little bit and talk about why we're doing that. So if we take a look at my tiers here, in tier 2, I have a technology OU and a groups OU underneath technology. And underneath that OU, I have a tier 2 technicians group, security group. And so for this position, it defines their role inside the organization, their work role. If we look inside there, I've just got, as a member, Jane Doe. So Jane Doe is a tier 2 technician, so she's inside that security group because that defines her title, her job role, all that kind of stuff. It is not going to be a security group that we use for administrator role purposes and for delegation of control assignment. Because remember, we want to get very granular for each permission on each OU, and that role group for the work role may span several different permissions on several different OUs. So let's take a look at a different type of role that may be typical. Let's go to domain groups. And let's take a look at something called Coleman Campus Curriculum Leads. In education, this is kind of typical. You might have teachers or staff that are pretty technical on the application level and deal with curriculum a lot, but often you might want to have them assigned to a very, very low level, very basic one permission, such as just resetting passwords. Let's say they're in the classroom and a student is having an issue logging into a website or something like that, and it's synchronized from Active Directory. You might not want to bog down help desk, and you might want to have them immediately be able to reset these as passwords so that they can do it in class, those kind of things. So you want to use the Delegation Control Wizard to assign people that have this work role into an administrative role group on certain OUs. So if we take a look at this group, but nothing more, remember, least-based permissions model. We have John Doe. So he's in that work role, but again, that's not an administrative role that we're going to directly assign that group to. So if we go back to the technology groups OU, we're going to actually see these three are actually security groups that I created with the intention of them being administrative role groups that we are going to use in the Delegation of Control Wizard. But right now, password administrators is empty. So what we're going to do is a two-tier model with delegation of control for the security groups. Password administrators, we're going to add Coleman campus curriculum leads to password administrators, which is an administrative security group. And we might want to add other work role types of security groups, such as maybe there's campus administrators that need to be able from time to time, vice principals, principals reset user passwords at their campus and maybe only at their campus. And so you could divide it by campus into your tiers as well and give them control through the Delegation of Control Wizards. And then you could break down password administrators for campus A, password administrators for campus B. I mean, it just depends on your organization. But I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. The main idea here is you want to have role groups separated from your administrative groups, administrative control groups, so that when a user changes roles or leaves an organization, you don't have to go through every single administrative role group and try to figure out what they had access to. You just remove them from the work role groups and boom, that's it. And administratively, it's much easier to see if the groups should be in there than trying to go through each user and identify, well, should this user be in there? I don't know who this user is. Leave that up to the people who are delegated to put users into those groups. And now very similarly, we'll just go into user administrators, that admin role group, and we're going to add tier 2 technicians. Because we're going to give a little bit more permissions to user administrators than we would password administrators. So now comes the fun part. We're going to show you 2 different ways to do the Delegation of Control Wizard. One is a common task, which is a very simplified version of the very simple tasks, and that we'll use for the password administrators. And then the more complex, advanced, more involved one is the custom tasks, and that might require a little bit of research on the permissions needed, the exact granular permissions. We'll see that in a little bit, but we'll go through both of them, and we'll use the custom tasks for the users administrators. So let's start off with password administrators. We're going to go to the domain users underneath tier 2. Now remember, stay within the same tier. Do not cross over the tiers. At least don't go up. You can go down. Right click that OU. And again, you could go a little more granular. Maybe for instance, we want the password administrators to not be able to do administration. Maybe we want to do it on finance and HR, each one of those independently. Maybe we want only domain admins at a higher level to reset administration user password. So let's go ahead and do that instead. Let's not go to domain users. Let's go to HR. Let's right click HR, and we're going to click on Delegate Control. And a nice little wizard is going to pop up. Next. So now it's asking us, which administrative group have we created to assign or delegate permissions to on this OU? So we're going to do the password permissions on this OU. So we're going to add that password administrators as a delegated group that we're going to assign permissions for to this HROU. going to click on next. And here's where you get to choose between the common tasks, which are out of the box, kind of obviously common tasks, no other way to say it, that you might want to delegate. You could choose one or several of them. In this case, and if you look through them, pretty basic stuff. In this case, we're not going to let them create, delete, and manage user accounts. Now, if you're just creating a user administrator, you might want to do this, but we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to reset user passwords and force change of that password at next login. In the next example, we're actually going to use custom task. But first, we're going to show you a common task. So all we need to do is say, nope, this is a very basic common task, and that's all they need to do. So I don't have to go through a complicated list of permissions to get this task done. I'm just saying password administrators have the ability to reset passwords and force password change at next login. So let's go ahead and do that on only the HR OU, nowhere else. And finish, and boom. That's all there is to the common task. Really easy. If we take a look at the properties and security, and I don't think it's going to show here. It's probably just going to show special. And we go to advanced. We're first going to see that inheritance is enabled, which is pretty much what we want, so that the different tiers can filter down with permissions. And we can see from the permissions, by sorting by the password administrators, they really have no inherited permissions, just the reset password on all descendant objects, all descendant user objects. And that's exactly what we want. Now let's go ahead and create a custom task. Let's go this time to the domain users, delegation control. Next. This time we're going to choose user administrators. That's the administrator security group, administrative security group we created earlier for that. Next. And this time we're going to, even though there really is one for create, delete, and manage user accounts, I want to demonstrate a custom task. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I do not want to leave it at all objects. I want to say only the following type of objects. I'm going to select contact objects, group objects, and user objects. And I'm going to say they can create those selected objects, and they can also delete, or you could have one or the other, depending on your needs. We'll go ahead and click on next. Now we could go to property specific, which gives us all the attributes, and that depends on your previous selections. But in this case, I think we just are fine with sticking with general. And I'm going to say on those objects, they have full control. Or, in this case, I'm going to say they can read, write, read all properties, which includes like extended attributes and all that kind of stuff. On user objects, I don't think there's any creating child objects and user objects, although maybe for the groups. So I guess we'll go ahead and do that. Delete child objects, which is pretty much full control. So I guess we'll go ahead and do that. But again, you're going to have to do a little bit of research on this to find out exactly which properties you want to include or need to include for permissions. And then we're going to click next and finish. And if we take a look at the properties and security, and we go to advanced, again, we got inheritance, and we can see if we sort by the principal, which is, the user, go all the way down to user administrators, we're going to see all the permissions that we just assigned. As a recap, you want to set up your organizational units correctly ahead of time into the tiers, similarly to what we've demonstrated here. You're going to want to also have a 2-tier security group implementation. It takes a lot of planning. You can't just jump into delegation of control. You've got to decide, okay, what are the work roles that these users are in? Do we need to modify those or add or whatever to get those in line with the roles inside of the admin roles that we create? Which ones do we want to create? Which permissions do we want to be able to enable on these roles? Which role groups, work role groups, are we going to include in which roles? Which OUs are each one of these administrative role groups, security groups, going to go to? A lot of planning. And you can always review the permissions on any OU and take a look at inheritance to find out, was there anything we need to remove or, modify? The procedure is pretty straightforward, but it takes a lot of planning. I can't stress that enough. Use best practice.
I sincerely thank you for taking the time to watch this video so far. I encourage you to like my video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell for future updates on videos. Feel free also to leave a comment. You can contribute by giving me a coffee through the link below. Patrons get exclusive access to some content. Members get access to all exclusive content, which includes things such as a ton of PowerShell scripts, troubleshooting articles, and how-to guides, etc. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.